Hello everyone, this is Jason from Primetime Aquatics, and today I wanted to talk about a really cool Mbuna cichlid. It's actually a dwarf Mbuna because it stays relatively small. It's the tank right behind me, Pseudotropheus saulosi. I think you're going to love it. They got really great color. Stay tuned. This is Pseudotropheus saulosi. We've got 4 males and 2 females in a 40-gallon breeder. The ratio is not quite ideal. In fact, most sources would probably tell you you want that male to female ratio flipped, where you'd have a couple of males and maybe 4 or 5 females. But this has worked out okay because they've grown up since they were very young juveniles. Now, this is known as a Dwarf Mbuna, and the reason for that is these fish stay relatively small. The males that you're looking at here are somewhere in that 3.5-inch range, with the females slightly smaller, maybe somewhere around just over 3 inches or so. They are from Lake Malawi in Africa. They are an Mbuna cichlid. Lake Malawi has hard water and a high pH, somewhere around that 8 or 8.2. Now again, the size is relatively small, so it's one of the few Mbunas that I feel comfortable with in a 40-gallon breeder, and the colors are super cool. And this is what's so awesome about the Pseudotropheus, is you're getting 2 colors for the same fish. The males that you're looking at here are the blue ones. They've got those really dark blue stripes, and the females have that really nice, pretty, kind of yellow, almost orange sort of color. Their temperament for an Mbuna really isn't all that super aggressive, and I think that's one of the reasons why we're okay with the way that we've set up this tank. They're not really picking on each other too bad. I would say that they are, again, a less aggressive Mbuna, so when we're looking for tank mates, you might want to stick with some of those other less aggressive Mbuna, things like Pseudotropheus acei, yellow labs, rusty cichlids. I've had good luck keeping them with red zebras, where maybe some of the more aggressive Mbunas might not be such a good idea. So things that come to mind, maybe you'd want to keep them away from Aratus. The Johannes at times can be a little bit aggressive. Certainly the Demasoni, which look very similar to these fish, would be probably a really bad idea just because of aggression issues and the potential for hybridization. So we really want to stay with the less aggressive Mbunas. There are bristlenose plecos in this tank, keeping the tank algae free, and I've found that the combination seems to work out pretty well as long as the bristlenose have some place to go kind of out of sight. But it's worked out fairly well. Now, when it comes to water parameters, the temperatures in our fish room are somewhere around that 78 to 80 degrees, and that works out pretty well for these fish. As I mentioned, the water hardness and pH should be kept at water hardness somewhere around that 180 parts per million, or somewhere around that 10 degrees water hardness would probably be a pretty good situation to have. And Mbunas just in general don't do really well in soft water. pH for us is right around, in this tank, is right around an 8.2, and that's working out really well. So that's doing a good job of mimicking what they would normally, the habitat that they'd normally be found in. They are, in terms of water quality, most Mbuna are pretty hardy, but again, we want to keep our ammonia at 0. We want to keep our nitrites at 0, and our nitrates in all of our tanks, we're trying to keep at 20 parts per million or less. In terms of feeding, Mbuna for the most part are relatively easy to feed. We feed a lot of cichlid flakes with a relatively low protein concentration or percentage. Mbuna in general don't do well with heavy protein diets, and so I'm not going to be feeding out bloodworms in this tank. I do frozen brine shrimp. They do eat flakes. They will eat cichlid pellets that, again, are meant for Lake Malawi cichlids, and particularly the Mbunas. They really like algae wafers, and so they will chow down on those from time to time as well. But again, we're trying to stay away from the really high protein diets. Tank size, as I mentioned, this is a 40-gallon breeder, and for this fish, for a species-only tank, I think it works fine. We've had these fish in this tank for quite some time now without any issues. Most Mbuna I really don't recommend unless you've got a 75-gallon or above. You could probably get away with a 55 in some cases, but because these fish stay relatively small compared to other Mbuna, maxing out around 3.5 inches, and because they're not super aggressive, this has worked out well. If you're going to keep them as part of a Mbuna community tank, then I would certainly recommend staying closer to that 75-gallon or greater. You'll probably have the best luck doing that and really overstocking that tank. For tank decorations, you can see here we've kept it relatively simple. What we have here is just some flagstone that's been kind of set up towards the back. And as you can see, they really like to interact with that flagstone. They like the little holes and the nooks and the crannies, and they hang out there quite a bit. In fact, it was hard to shoot this video because a lot of times that's where they wanted to hang out. Other fish, dither fish, would probably bring them out more, but they feel naturally comfortable around rock work. It's also good to have a little sandy area, as you can see here in the front of the tank, because when it comes to breeding, they really like to have a little bit of an open area for that. Now, Mbuna, generally speaking, they're pretty aggressive eaters, and they like to eat a lot. And that means you've got to be careful with your filtration. Now here we've just got one medium-sized sponge filter. You can see it's doing a good job keeping the tank looking good, but I would say this tank is lightly stocked with just 6 Mbuna and a couple bristlenose, so it's not like we're having a super heavy bio load or a super heavy mechanical load. So that one sponge filter you see in the corner is doing great. When it comes to breeding, again, it's really easy to tell the difference between males and females once the males start to color up. They're very different colors. So you need a male, you need a female. The females are mouth-brooding cichlids, and what they're going to do, the male is going to kind of dig a little pit there, and the female will drop the eggs, and then she'll pick them up in her mouth. The male will fertilize those eggs in the female's mouth, and then she will hold those eggs for around 2.5 weeks or so, between 2 and 3 weeks. Now what we do to have the best success in keeping as many fry as we can is usually when we see a female holding. And by the way, the female that is mostly shown in this video, she's holding eggs in her mouth in this video. And so we're probably going to give her about another week or so, and then we're going to remove her from the tank, put her in a 10-gallon, and allow her to spit the fry out when she's ready. She doesn't have to be harassed by these males. She's really not eating much right now at this point, and so it'll reduce the stress for her, and it will maximize the likelihood that the fry survive. The fry don't survive in this tank unless we pull the females because they get eaten by the other inhabitants. Now you can see here we've got some baby saulosi here in a 10-gallon. The females already spit these fry out. These fish are probably somewhere in the neighborhood of 4 to 6 weeks old or so. And the females generally, their mouths aren't very big. And so at least in terms of an Mbuna, they don't have huge batches of fry. I've found that for the most part, the saulosi might top out at around 15 to 20 fry. At least ours do. And there have been times where they've only spit out 6 or 8. But as they get older, they spit out a little bit more fry. The fry do a really good job of taking live baby brine shrimp. That's usually what we feed most of our newborn fry. So we'll feed them live baby brine until a point, usually within about 2 or 3 weeks or so, we start crushing up some flake food. And Mbuna really take to that fairly aggressively. So it's not something I typically worry about a whole lot. But the fry are super easy to raise. They're all going to start out yellow, so at least initially they're going to be hard to tell the difference between male and female, but one of the things that you'll start to see is the males at first, they start to get dark stripes within the yellow body. And then over time, as they mature, you start to see more and more blue color, and that is usually the way that we tell them apart. Now, these are really great fish, and so I highly recommend if you have a chance to check them out, if you have a chance you run across them in a store or a swap or an auction or somewhere, I would give them a try if you're into Mbuna cichlids. Again, they stay relatively small. You see the nice colors that they have. They're not super overly aggressive. If there are any challenges, it's that you really want to have a tank that is appropriate for them with other Mbuna cichlids. Could you get away with maybe having some peacocks in there as well? Possibly. It's not one of my most favorite things to do is mix the peacocks and Mbunas. I've done it. These fish would probably do okay with that, but I really like to keep these as an Mbuna only tank, but certainly worth a try if you come across them.